So yeah, in the age of WikiLeaks, where a disgruntled employee can leak proprietary or private information online anonymously, what can companies do to protect themselves?
So WikiLeaks, yeah, creates a huge problem, and it's not just WikiLeaks. As a matter of fact, WikiLeaks is right now pretty much shut down between the credit card companies shutting off the money and the charges against Julian. But there's going to be other websites that will attempt to do the same thing, and probably worse, because Julian at least spent some time verifying facts before he pushed them out there. And the problem you have is that any employee who for 20 years has been a good employee may have a political agenda or a social agenda or an ecological agenda that your company may suddenly decide to make a decision that goes strongly against, and then they suddenly will become malicious, where you would never have known that before. And the reason for that discussion is it's very hard behaviorally to recognize this unless you do a lot of background checks on your employees, which is not really a good return on investment of time, and it violates some privacy issues. So that leaves one last piece, which is how do you keep them from moving bad data, however innocuous that data is, out of the organization. Our point of view at Verdasys is you have to instrument the host, meaning you have to put some sort of technology on the systems they work on that will watch the data flow, more importantly, watching data than employees. And when they see data moving in a direction that it shouldn't, be able to recognize that and prevent it. For example, you know, WikiLeaks, in the case of the way they collect data, oftentimes it comes in through email. And oftentimes it's a person that simply jumps onto a webmail and puts the information in, attaches it, and sends it from inside the network inside the company. Oftentimes, if you're looking at a traditional network monitoring system or DLP system, there won't be any content in there that would be picked up because it's not related to personally identifiable data or healthcare data in many cases. It's more data related to, as we saw, State Department conversations or government conversations. You know, WikiLeaks has gone after some bad guys too in Africa, corrupt governments, things like that. So therefore, you've got to have a little more understanding of context of that user moving that data. Meaning, is it ever going to be normal for a user to attach a document from inside the network and send it over Gmail to an outside address? And if that's not a normal situation for your company, you can stop that activity right there, and now you've prevented that WikiLeaks leak. So there are ways to do it. It is based on instrumenting the host. It's based on being able to understand where the data is going, what the context of that data is, and put in place a sort of data control or some strong data control. That could be as simple as a block. You know, prompting the user to say, hey, we don't allow data to move off the network, or we're going to allow you to do this, but we want you to know that we've captured this data and we're going to be investigating it, or you have the chance to say no before you send it. Oftentimes they'll say no at that point. Or you can encrypt the data, and then when it gets to WikiLeaks, it's worthless anyways. So there are ways to do it.
How can one detect that data has been stolen before a duplicate product ends up on the market?
Well, that's a big question because there's lots of ways duplicate markets end up. So let's just narrow it down to how can a company effectively protect their intellectual property or trade secrets having to do with product designs, so they don't enter as a competitive product from a vendor who's stolen the data. You know, the biggest challenge there is that most companies just don't recognize that there are people out there doing that, right? I mean, one of the reasons this conference is important is because many companies, and sadly I hate to say that I talk to many of them, do not believe that there are competitors, be they government sponsored or not, be they in Asia or somewhere else, that want to build a better product than you and get it to market faster. And the best way to do that is to let you pay the R&D cost, and then they build the product faster than you can. And so just that awareness is the first step, right? The second step is when to take it seriously, to get some executive sponsorship and to actually build a program to prevent it, meaning put together people that own the data, and it's their responsibility to protect it. You know, one of the first questions I ask when I go into a company is, okay, here's your IP for your product line next year. Who owns it? And oftentimes it'll be a line of business manager or a product manager. And I said, okay, you own it. You're responsible for it. Have you ever asked the security guys how they're securing it? Never even crossed their mind. So just having those conversations begins the process of doing it. Once you have those conversations and the business line and the security folks start working together, that's the point where now you can bring technology into play to start actually solving these problems. And again, you know, from a Verdasys point of view, the absolute best way is to instrument the host systems, the servers, the workstations, the laptops, where this IP lives and these people interact with it, because that's the point of risk. You know, I'll hear people say to me, well, we've encrypted all the data in our data center. And that's great, and they should do that because there's attacks that go on against data centers through SQL injection and other things. But that's not how intellectual property is being stolen by insiders, or even in many cases by cyber threats, because they steal the identity of a privileged user in an outside attack, or the privileged user is inside. And they can decrypt that data because they have the rights to, and then that control is negated once it's on the endpoint being used in an application, being used on a laptop, and then they're in a CATIA engineering file or a CAD system. They export that to Excel or Visio, and boom, now it's unstructured data that can move anywhere, and those people can steal it. And that's the point of risk. That's why we believe that instrumenting systems and including having monitors on your network requires a very complete solution of technology to solve it. But the technology is only as good as the program. And since very few companies have started with the program, that's where I recommend they always start.
Can you tell us about the Digital Guardian platform?
Sure. Digital Guardian is an interesting platform because it came into being from a company. The founders were from a biopharmaceutical company that had created a very nice early drug testing algorithm software that would identify early drug candidates to reduce the amount of testing that would go on and the materials that needed to be tested to ultimately get to a drug candidate that would go into clinical trials. And it was very successful. The company was ultimately bought up by Schering-Plough. 6 months before that merger took place, or the acquisition took place, the chief scientists showed up, and chief scientists, I say in plural because there were a couple there, and not in conjunction with each other, each of them happened to show up at the head of IT with the request to buy a CD burner computer and spools of CDs. Now this was 1999-2000, so this is where you had to buy an actual machine because laptops didn't have burners on them. And the IT manager was smart enough to say, boy, why would the two senior scientists 6 months before an acquisition be buying a CD burner and spools of CDs? And they were approached, and sure enough, they both were taking data. And they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. One of them said, I'm going to be going back to teach at the university I left when I came here, and I want to use some of this because it's very, very helpful in the classroom. And the other said, I'm going to be consulting. I want to consult to Schering-Plough. I want to have the information so that I can be more effective. Well, of course, the big checks they were getting weren't for their computers and the desks and the building. They were for those algorithms and the results that these guys were taking. And of course, they had to be told, no, you don't own that data anymore. You can't take it. But you are going to get a nice check. After that acquisition was complete, the owner, the CEO of the company, got quite upset because he said, gee, you're telling me that I spend literally millions of dollars a year with the likes of Microsoft and Symantec and Cisco, and I don't have any security within my organization that can keep any one of my employees from downloading all the data and walking out the door. And that was how the company became founded. So the company was created on the notion of insider threat detection and control and risk mitigation. We started in, we get lumped into the DLP market, data loss prevention or protection market, whatever you want to call it, which really was a network appliance market that was created to protect personally identifiable data for banks, help them be PCI compliant, help companies do some levels of HIPAA compliance, which is a U.S. healthcare law. Even PIPEDA can be included in what network DLP can do, but it does not effectively protect intellectual property or trade secrets. And we came at it from a very different point of view. The markets have now merged. We have both the network appliance piece and the host piece. But in doing that, we added some other pieces that were critically important. One is a encryption piece. So we have a built-in encryption capability that can recognize a file on any machine that has one of our host agents on it and encrypt it. We can encrypt emails, we can encrypt files, we can encrypt files going to a USB device. So for us, encryption becomes an access control as well as a data loss control. And no one else can do that in the way we do it, and it's very effective. Another piece is we do data tagging, data classification. And that allows companies to actually see in a very rich way how IP and trade secrets move. Because how do you identify a piece of IP? Well, it's very hard to content scan a CATIA file. It's not a Word document. And there's not going to be much in there to tell you it's an IP anyways. But CATIA files come out of CATIA engineering applications that are used by certain individuals that have access to those apps that work on certain projects, and we can know that. And then when we see one of those export that to Excel or screenshot it and put it in a Word doc, we can recognize that this is IP being transferred. We can classify that information, and that tag will live with that document no matter where it goes. And then instead of having to understand the document, we just read the tag and apply control. Boy, that's next year's engineer designs for new electric batteries for cars. And here's an individual loading 3 gig of it onto a USB stick. Now that probably is an issue. So we block the activity, create an alert, and let the user know that this activity has been monitored and that this is a real problem. And then they can go manage that user however they like. And then the last piece we built in is a case management and forensics piece, because ultimately with IP, you're going to need to prove in court that this individual is trying to attempt to steal it, and you've got to have sound evidentiary data that's had chain of custody that can be used in a court case. So those are all the pieces that build the platform. The other thing that's very important about it is it's a single platform. You don't have to buy and load 6 or 7 different products. It's all integrated into a single environment, so it gives you a very rich way to watch how your IP moves in your organization, decide where your risks are, apply the appropriate controls, audit the entire activity, and then if a case occurs where you have to take action, have the evidence in place in a way that it can be used. And that's what we do.
Thanks a lot, Ed.
Okay, pleasure.
Appreciate that.